Renault have sold a 24% stake in Alpine for a reported $218 million. This values the Alpine team at close to $1 billion in total, which is a huge valuation for a team in Formula 1. So how are F1 teams worth so much? And what are the risks associated with this huge increase in value? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. The rapid growth of Formula 1. When the most recent Concord Agreement was signed in 2021, there was a new team entrant fee of $200 million. This was an anti-dilution fee which would be shared amongst the other teams in the sport and was initially seen as a huge barrier to entry for new teams. The fee was agreed in 2020 and was similar to the value of the Williams team, which was sold for just under this figure around that time. Initially, the fee was criticised by fans, especially given the money would be shared amongst the remaining F1 teams. But since the introduction of this fee, there have been teams interested in joining the sport, and there have been several potential options to increase the grid to 12 teams for 2026. Recently, top teams in the sport have claimed that the $200 million anti-dilution fee is too small, and that within 2 years since this agreement was signed, the sport has already outgrown this figure. Some have even suggested that this number should be closer to $1 billion, which is a huge amount of money, but when you make the comparison of Formula 1 teams to other sports teams around the world, it isn't out of the realm of possibility. The reason that Formula 1 teams have increased in value so much in the last few years is due to Liberty Media. The sports owners have taken Formula 1 to new heights of popularity, with Drive to Survive bringing a new generation of fans to the sport and lifting the visors on the F1 drivers to give an insight into their personalities off track as well as their talent on it. The sport's social media presence has increased rapidly over this time as well, and the sport's ultimate popularity exploded through the 2021 season when there was one of the closest championship fights in the sport's history. The season took Formula 1 into the mainstream media, and the ripple effect from this season can still be felt today with sellout crowds at most races. In addition, the sport has continued to see higher viewing figures, which has enabled Liberty Media to charge more. Their goal to grow in the USA has been successful, and with 3 races in the States this year, the ESPN deal to show Formula 1 was reportedly 15 times more expensive than the previous year. Even I have seen this on my channel, as my most viewed audience is in the USA, such is the popularity of this sport as a whole in that country. The introduction of the budget cap in 2021 has enabled Formula 1 teams to become profitable. In the past, F1 teams would invest all they could into improving their cars. The teams knew that with every extra dollar spent on improving their car, they could get one step further ahead of their rivals. This arguably resulted in excessive spending, with some teams spending more than $400 million a year, but the teams knew that if they didn't spend it, then their rivals probably would be, which might give them a competitive advantage. With the new budget restrictions introduced in 2021, they would now be able to profit from taking part in the sport. Red Bull's model is a great example of this. They signed sponsorship deals at the beginning of the 2022 season with Oracle worth a reported $500 million over 5 years. And then a $150 million sponsorship with Bybit over 3 years. Those 2 deals alone would cover Red Bull's annual maximum cost for car development over the following 3 seasons. So there's no doubt that the top teams have been able to start profiting from taking part in Formula 1, which means these businesses are more valuable for potential investors. Liberty Media has enabled Formula 1 to be seen as an investment opportunity and has ensured that the teams themselves are more valuable than ever. This means that the teams have grown in value more rapidly than we've ever seen before, and this has resulted in the latest move with A-list celebrities being part of a consortium to purchase part of the Alpine team. But before we look at this significant investment, I want to take a moment to ask you to subscribe to Behind the Drive. We're working to bring you the best F1 content out there, and the best way to be the first to watch it is to hit the subscribe button. Alpine's $900 million valuation. Alpine is the 5th best team in Formula 1 right now, and is therefore probably the 5th most valuable team as well. Of course, there are nuances to this estimated valuation ranking, but they are a team that has sat in the midfield for several years with ambitions to get closer to the front, but have failed to break their way into the front runners as Aston Martin has achieved in 2023. Since Renault joined the sport in 2016, there have been doubts over whether the team was fully committed to getting back to the front. The team have been consistent midfield runners but have not threatened the top teams. The manufacturer's doubts in its ability to win championships is evident based on the rebrand of the team for 2021 to become Alpine. Renault's recent decision to sell a 24% stake for $218 million is arguably another reason to suggest that the parent company isn't fully backing its F1 outfit. To be looking to offload some of the asset implies that they aren't happy to continue investing the money required, even if it's a profitable enterprise to operate an F1 team in 2023. The investment consortium that has joined the sport includes Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, the pair who have recently bought Wrexham Football Club and have brought them back into the Football League. This decision from the pair is proof that Formula One is an attractive investment and is gaining the mass appeal in the sports investment market. The only reason a deal like this has been possible has been as a result of the changes that Liberty Media have made. I think that most people would agree it's excellent for the sport as a whole. In a similar fashion, it's been reported that Audi have spent $600 million to purchase 75% of the Sauber team. This would put that team's value at $800 million, which again is a massive amount of money. These figures would have been impossible just 3 years ago in Formula One, and it suggests that the top teams in the sport could be valued at well over $1 billion. And while these teams' investors will be thankful to have these valuations, there are significant risks associated with these price tags. The dangers of this valuation. While it's great to see F1 teams getting external investment, with the entry price for new teams being set at $200 million, I believe this is a sign that this rule needs to be adjusted. Admittedly, the anti-dilution fee is to be spent on top of the huge initial investment required to set up a successful Formula One team, but it's a small price to pay for an interested party. You could argue that if a team's willing to pay this figure, then they will be able to afford to enter the sport and be successful, but this misses the point of why the teams agreed to introduce it in the first place. The teams split this fee equally as compensation for this new entrant taking some of the prize money. With more teams, there may be more racing action, but fundamentally there will be less money to go around. With the sport growing as it is, this is unlikely to be an issue. The limit on the number of teams is 12, but for the existing setups that are used to being one of 10, it seems reasonable that they should be compensated for this. With the current Concord agreement set to run to 2025, it would need to be changed to amend this fee. But with the rapid nature of the growth of the sport, it seems plausible. In January 2023, Forbes valued Formula One as a whole at more than $17 billion, and it is the most valuable element of Liberty Media's sports group. This represents a 400% increase in value since the organisation brought Formula One in 2016. The growth of this sport is seeing right now is unprecedented, and it seems like the teams will use this recent Alpine news as a way to encourage the sport to consider updating the fee. And in my opinion, the sport should also consider this price to be at risk. Given the high valuation of teams on the grid right now, you could argue that if a team could get themselves set up on the grid and pay this fee, they might immediately have a sports team with a value that exceeds their initial outlay. This may mean that investors could be looking to enter the sport with a view to a short-term investment with a quick return. Of course, some teams without much success won't have as much value, but there's no doubt that some teams could be taken along for the ride of the growth of the sport and benefit financially. For me, this is the biggest risk, especially given how public this recent investment in the Alpine team has been. Formula One should want to protect the current teams and ensure that any additions to the grid have long-term ambitions to succeed in the sport. It's critical that the grid remains competitive if the sport is going to continue growing, and by not considering the new potential entrants carefully, the sport could be at risk of plateauing. One way to ensure this risk is reduced is by increasing the anti-dilution fee, but should this not be possible, it's also important that the new teams are appropriately vetted when joining. When Formula One last opened up the doors to new teams in the early 2010s, the 3 new teams quickly failed and arguably damaged the reputation of the sport. None of the 3 teams that eventually made it onto the grid were ever competitive, and even the most recent new joiner to the grid in Haas has shown how difficult it is to be competitive in Formula One as a new team. There are many options for Formula One to consider, including the Andretti Cadillac option, which is the most vocal potential entrant to the sport at this time. There is a thorough, costly and rigorous application process that the teams must adhere to, but it could still be argued that the teams might slip through the cracks based on these huge valuations. On the whole, in my opinion, at least 4 F1 teams are now probably valued at over $1 billion. This is a huge moment for the sport, and it's testament to the incredible investments made by Liberty Media to create mass market appeal for this sport.